my daughter bumped into my son, and she bumped her head on the wall whilst jumping on the bed. I let them jump on the bed in my house because we have 2 levels of mattresses. Anyway, she's fine now. She had a cuddle and an ice pack, and now she's got a piece of fairy bread and a banana smoothie. As does her brother. So everybody's cool. And we'll go out and do something fun later. But I understand for you guys, it's the middle of the night-ish. What time is it for you? 10 o'clock? I'm, as usual, an Australian commenting on American politics with that slightly horrified outsider's view, but I also am very shaped and inspired by American culture. And you can say that selectively. It's okay to have noticed good things. A lot of migrants to America have seen that America wears its values on its sleeve with regards to embracing migrants, even as it also simultaneously and contradictorily entertains other values of denigrating and disparaging migrants and having hate crimes that rise after somebody comes into power, like Donald Trump, who helps weaponize hatred as a political force to gain power, and so extends it, perpetuates it, validates it where he finds it, and makes a lot of people who were probably quietly racist before now a lot more comfortable with being openly racist. Even as they don't acknowledge that it's racism, they'll still insist that Trump has merely made it more socially acceptable to say the quiet parts out loud about wanting to be protective. Yes, darling? More fairy bread, eh? Well, you'll have to wait, darling, because Mummy started a broadcast again. Okay? Yeah, but I'll leave the butter out to get a bit softer, so next time it's easier. Sweetie, if you complain about it, Mummy won't get you any more fairy bread, okay? So either you put up with a 10-minute wait time or no. I'm glad you liked it. Drink your drink. Willie's here from the DJ Willie Show. Hello. Kimchi's here. Hi. Hi, everybody watching. So this probably won't be a long broadcast, but I'm still all here for the savaging of Dr. Birx. Whilst I celebrate her choice to come forward and be more clear about how she felt shackled by the Trump administration and couldn't be honest with the American public, I read out loud before a quote from her, which I will read again because I think it's critical people keep this in mind as she does the talk show or mainstream media circuit to rehabilitate her reputation as a scientist, as a researcher, as a health promoter. And Dr. Birx said, he's been so attentive. She was asked, how would you describe the job President Trump is doing? And she said, he's been so attentive to the scientific literature and the details and the data. I think his ability to analyze and integrate data that comes out of his long history in business is a real benefit during these discussions about medical issues. So she's rewarding Trump's tendency to pay attention to briefings enough so that he could try and lay claim to being a scientific genius when he just invented all by himself the idea of injecting disinfectant in order to clean the virus out of the lungs. He paid attention in a way that a narcissist pays attention, not to be of any benefit or use to the American population directly, but to claim credit for what he thought was evidence of this superior ability to synthesize and integrate information. There are interviews in which he is on camera saying that his uncle worked at MIT and was a notable intellect of his time, and that he, Trump, was surprising everybody with his ability to process medical information, and that he should perhaps have been a doctor. Well, the various Trump supporters who ingested bleach as a consequence of taking Trump's self-proclaimed intellect at face value, those people have to live with the consequences of following medical suggestions from a very confident narcissist who definitely is definitely played a lead role in waging a soft genocide against the American people, to say nothing of those around the world who have subscribed to Trump brand disinformation and now won't take a vaccine and won't participate in public health measures such as mask wearing or social distancing because they've internalized Trump's narrative of the virus, which is he suggested the media were overhyping it, that it was a product of hysteria, and that it wasn't to be taken seriously. So Boston Tea made the comment that I'm beginning to think you will never get over Trump not being president anymore, which I would like to reply, I know there are approximately 400,000 Americans who will not have the opportunity to ever get over Trump being president because they lost their lives under his malevolent tenure as president, at which point he sabotaged the federal government response to a pandemic crisis, which is also a key factor in the economic crisis that was attendant to their poor efforts to try and contain the virus. Trump and his son-in-law Kushner, there's evidence that they purposely encouraged the spread of the virus by sabotaging their own plans for national testing because they thought when a lot of people die, they'll be in so much pain, they'll be just ready to blame someone, and we'll encourage them to blame their Democratic governors. So you can see that process of encouraging people to blame Democratic governors is very advanced. Even though Trump was the person withholding information from the public, Trump knew that the virus was airborne as early as February the 7th, as disclosed. He disclosed to Bob Woodward. He told a journalist writing a book that the virus was airborne and that it posed a threat to the lives of younger people as well as a more concentrated threat to elderly people or people with health conditions. He understood that it was transmitted very easily, that it was airborne. The Woodward tapes should be played over and over again to the American people to help them come to terms with the fact that their president committed crimes against them and that his supporters are... No, it hasn't been 10 minutes. Okay. Why don't you set the timer on the iPad? Do you know how to do it? Your brother can show you how. So that's a big thing for Americans to come to terms with. And it's to be hoped that legal consequences are attendant on some of these people's crimes. There can never be a full reckoning of all the harm that was inflicted on the American people, to say nothing of people around the world whose governments have taken a cue from the, at the time, apparently successful Donald Trump, who was very successful in funneling public money into his pocket and very successful in disrupting the consistency of message from public health experts. He made public health messaging inconsistent and unreliable. And as a consequence, hundreds of thousands of people around the world have died. His influence was not confined to American borders. He's influenced Bolsonaro in Brazil, who denied the virus was serious, who told Brazilians to stop whining, and whose hospital systems are on the verge of collapse across Brazil because of the very serious nature of COVID when you don't contain it. It creates a breeding ground that facilitates the development of variants. And some of those COVID variants are potentially going to be able to avoid vaccination containment. So everybody's life is, to a degree, jeopardized by Trump's actions in inspiring dictators around the world. Molly notes that the Democratic governors are the ones who were actually doing something to try and control COVID, such as shutdowns and mandatory mask wearing. Yes, it's true. Some Republican governors got on board as well. There were some better than others. I believe Governor Larry Hogan understood that he shouldn't side with Trump in disavowing the serious nature of the pandemic. And he sought to get some more tests from South Korea because his wife was South Korean American, and he could spin that into a lovely personal story about using your wife's connections to help people in your state so that they feel especially grateful to you and your family. But the truth is that those tests that Governor Larry Hogan ordered from South Korea weren't compatible with lab tests in the US, and they couldn't be used. So he's written about that story in a book of his biography. He's going to promote it probably to try and position himself as a Trump alternative for 2024 in relation to the presidential race. Don't think that's going to work very well for Larry Hogan, because people have already reported on the failings of his testing efforts. But the reason he was in that position in the first place, desperate to obtain tests for his constituents, was because Trump had not organized a federal government testing response. And my children are hanging out together. So it is a great investment of your time to play with your children. I agree. And my children are articulate, funny, and cute, and really rewarding to spend time with. So thanks for your commentary, Boston Tea. Other people might not be able to see your remark that I'm replying to, so I'll just put it up here so they can see. One time I managed to so block Boston Tea from my Twitter accounts and on Periscope that he wasn't actually able to comment. And I'm not sure, but I think it was him coming back with another account called It's All Right, Jack, or something like that. And at that point, he was raging. So I'm not entirely sure if that was you, but if it was, you have a nice-ish persona for your trolling efforts through Periscope or YouTube. But if that other character is also you, then, and I think it is because you came back and said you've blocked me, that raging, absolutely more explicitly racist and hostile character is the other side to the coin of your professed nicey, go play with your kids, you're never going to get over Trump because you're obsessed character. So I shouldn't devote too much of my time to responding to you. It is reflective of the world. Kimchi retorts that I am spending my free time educating trolls, which is true. Why is Caitlin Bennett trending? Oh, because she has been racist by asking a black rapper if he still sees his dad, because playing into negative tropes or stereotypes about people from a certain demographic background is really nasty, condescending, and, well, it's racist. It is what it is. To not just let people live and to pretend that because, yes, there are some statistics to support the idea of incomplete family units, because America has a very high rate of incarcerating black males, in no small part because of the 14th Amendment loophole that says you can still effectively have slavery provided you are using incarcerated labor. So you can pay somebody $1 for a day's work if they're in jail. So that's how you can still have slaves. And that's provided a very powerful boost to private prison owners and various state governments in building lots of prisons and encouraging their judicial system and their police force to investigate, detain, and charge and convict Black Americans of crimes that are proportionately committed at a similar rate by white people. I'm speaking of drug offenses here. White drug use and black drug use is equivalent in America, but black people are bearing the burden of that 14th Amendment loophole that allows people to benefit from the enslaved labor of people, provided that precondition is met that they have been jailed for something. So there's that. So Caitlin Bennett, you may know, as someone who took an AR-15 to her college graduation, and she was blonde and had long hair, and the mixture of those factors, of that femininity and that embrace of lethal weapons, was a potent mix for earning an income as a commentator who just gets to troll the left, as it were, to validate the negative worldview of people who dismiss the left as baby eaters who don't believe in the Second Amendment, whereas people on the right invariably have a completely wrong-footed grasp of the Second Amendment. They typically cling to the phrase that says shall not be infringed, when the full statement, I should memorize this by now, but the full statement is something like, a well-regulated militia being of necessity to a free nation shall not, the right of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed upon. Let's have a look what the actual words are. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So that whole Second Amendment is not discussing people's personal use to bear arms in their home. It's discussing maintaining a well-regulated militia with weaponry. So well-regulated militia, that's the first few words of that amendment. So the reference point is, I would say, undeniable, but of course you have multitudes of conservatives who deny it, including Justice Anthony Scalia, who was the key vote in that critical decision of Heller. So that was in 2008, a landmark decision that interpreted the Second Amendment as referencing an individual's right to keep and bear arms. And I can find you So this was, I'm reading a little bit from a piece published in the Washington Post in 2018 by someone who is a professor of English and linguistics at the University of Illinois called Dennis Barron. And a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, i.e. we need an army to defend the US from potential antagonists. And so those people in the well-regulated militia should be allowed to keep and bear arms, and that shall not be infringed. And that's describing the rights of people who are volunteers in the National Guard of the time to buy weapons, because America itself as a nation didn't have the money to pay for a freestanding army at that point. So they didn't have a $1 trillion Pentagon budget at that point when the Constitution was written. And so many conservatives have no concept of any of this information. They cling to the last four words, shall not be infringed. And they also add God to it by saying, God, these are my God-given rights, shall not be infringed. So don't mess with it in any way, shape, or form. I shall buy whatever weaponry I want. I shall carry it around with me wherever I want, because that is my understanding of how you oppose tyranny. You have weapons, so that if the tyrants ever come from you, you go all Bruce Willis and you crawl up in the ventilation systems and you shoot the people. Someone was just arrested with a massive arsenal of weaponry, and he had called the police to say that workmen who had come to fix a gas leak in his home were eating his food, so he was holding them at gunpoint. And when police came, he had multiple semi-automatic weapons and a safe with 3 apparent sticks of dynamite in them. Oh yeah, I think there's only 1 minute left, Bubba. So I'll say goodbye. So yes, that Republican lawlessness, they promote lawlessness because they promote the idea that the Second Amendment means keep all the guns you like because you might need to fight off the government. And they want people to believe that the government is inherently bad because they understand that all of the civil rights progress in America has been delivered by big government when ruled by good leadership that's then responded to civil rights activists and has granted America more rights, and the right to form unions and the right to use collective action to push back against the power of wealthy people to form transactional relationships with workers that are very exploitative. So it's to find a better balance between exploitation and mutual benefit. Some people have the investment capital to start businesses and the ideas. Some people supply labor. It should be mutually beneficial. People shouldn't be harmed. People shouldn't be employed at wages that are so low they have to have multiple jobs to even put food on the table. People shouldn't have to live near factories that don't modify their effluent so that the neighboring water tables and rivers and lakes are polluted with neurotoxins and carcinogens that harm children in a concentrated way because their bodies are developing and causing neurological problems and developmental delays that impact on children's ability to get an education or hold a job or rise in the ranks of life, to have social mobility and to have ambitions for themselves. That's greatly impacted if you've got conditions or if your life is ended early because of your exposure to chemicals that certain corporations, certain corporate executives have maximized their profits by minimizing their expenses in chemically treating their waste products so that it doesn't harm humans as extensively. Marsha says hi. Lindsey Graham today said that he wants an AR-15 because Republicans want to resonate with people whose highest values are protecting their property, whose conception of the world is defend self, defend property, and own weapons in case enough Black people obtain power in government that they want to reverse slavery and instead seek reparations by enslaving white people. Something that's not an ambition at all of any Black advocates or Black activists, but is the product of the fevered imagination of people who've overdosed on religiosity, overdosed on, yeah, that's right, darling. So Mummy's going to say goodbye, everybody. Let's say good. You want to say goodbye to people? I'm going to tell them you're okay after. Or I could just ask them to wait here while I go make you another piece of fairy bread. Do you think they would do that? Okay, sure. All right. Well, if you guys feel like waiting while I just quickly go and spread some butter on a piece of bread, that's what I'm going to do because that's what my baby girl wants. Is that what you want, Papa? So I'll come back. If there's anybody still here when I come back, we'll see. We'll see, but I will be approximately, how long do you think it'll take me? 2 minutes? I think it'll probably take me 2 minutes or maybe even 1 minute if I'm fast. And if you help me, can you make sure you take your plate to the kitchen, back to the kitchen so I can put your new piece of bread on the plate? I did. You did already? Okay, good. All right, folks, well, let's have this gamble. You didn't eat the crust? That's okay. Do you want some strawberries with this one too? Anyway, I'll be back in a minute. If you feel like checking back in a minute, I should be back. All right. Oh, you okay, Papa? Yeah. See how fast we can go. All right. You can't give out hearts anymore. Oh, no. Is this where we talk about her? Oh, Davcat is such a good mom. Thank you. Thanks, Christopher. So Molly can give out awards. There's maybe a temporary hold on awards. I don't mind. I'm so happy to see you still here. Thanks for staying put. And I promise I will let you all go to sleep sooner rather than later. Oh, look, Molly can give an award. She just gave an Appreciate Award. Very sweet. Thank you so much, Molly. All right, what else have we got? Oh, yes. So I talked about Dr. Birx and how she lauded Trump for his, what was it again? I really think this is not a tombstone quote, but it's something that people should really stay familiar with, that he's been so attentive to analysis, so attentive to the scientific literature and the details and the data. And I think his ability to analyze and integrate data is a real benefit during these discussions about medical issues. But she said also that comes out of his long history in business. So she supported the mythology of Trump as a successful businessman, a mythology that has been critical in indoctrinating America into believing that Trump is a positive force in American politics. And for that, we thank Mark Burnett, the producer of Survivor and other American television shows, who also conceived of and produced The Apprentice, and was apparently in talks with Vladimir Putin at one stage to produce a reality TV show, I think relating to the space station. Let me have a look. Mark Burnett, Putin, reality TV show. Training. Okay. US banker with Putin ties reportedly tapped Mark Burnett to access Donald Trump transition team. Yep, there's that story, but that's not the story I'm after. So in 2006, he was talking about a reality TV production will end with an ordinary American making a televised trip to Russia's Mir space station in late 2001 or early 2002. This was a very complicated deal to arrange, but with Survivor producer Mark Burnett's guidance, we. All right. So that's important to remember. And I can show you this as a headline to make it easy to see that I'm not in any way, shape, or form making this up, that Mark Burnett was indeed involved with Vladimir Putin. So let's share that on screen. So it says Trump's apprentice producer once did business with Putin. There's a story published in Huffington Post in 2017. So there was a New York Times report, a New York Times Magazine report in 2001 that proves decisively that before he created The Apprentice, he was deep in negotiations with none other than Russian President and strongman Vladimir Putin. Here's what Burnett told the New York Times about negotiating with Putin and the dangers of setting a reality TV program on a Russian space explorer mission. For Burnett, the day has been a typically scheduled torrent of interviews and production meetings, culminating in a cell phone strategy session in his car with his lawyer and manager. After the conversation, Burnett tells me, half crowing and half cowed, Putin is involved. Yes, that Putin. Burnett has been negotiating with Russian officials for months over Destination Mir, but recent reports on how the space station is about to fall out of the sky have, to say the least, complicated his plans. Still, he believes the show can be pulled off, perhaps using a deal the Russians have in place with the new International Space Station, or if that falls through, maybe settling for the less thrilling option of simply shooting the contestant into orbit for a couple of weeks. Openly contemptuous of even a bit of negative thinking, Burnett looks at it this way. I think Mir is going to be hard only as a political thing. The show will be easy. I really want to do a space show, and typically I'm quite good at making things happen. There you go. So Mark Burnett wasn't just discussing a regular television deal with Putin, he signed a unique deal to turn the Russian space station into a reality TV show in outer space. So there you go. Mark Burnett, of course, helped Trump obtain income, because the income that was generated for Trump through the success of that fabricated reality TV show. And I say fabricated because the Trump organization doesn't actually have that many employees. It's mostly a family business. Trump does a lot of leasing of his name to be put on properties. He does own a lot of properties, but of course, real estate is a prime mechanism for money laundering. So if you're helping international criminal syndicates get away with making the proceeds of their crimes less detectable to law enforcement agencies, then you get a cut of that. So that's one plank of Donald Trump's successful business methodology. And the other is to pretend to be a successful billionaire with a successful legal business income stream on this reality TV show constructed by Mark Burnett, who, as we now know, has no problem with working with Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin, who is internationally famous for being a stone-cold killer who murders journalists, who murders people involved with his schemes. A second doctor has now died who was involved in treating Putin's political opponent, Alexei Navalny, when he was poisoned on a plane. And we know the mechanism for that poisoning now too, because Navalny, I don't know if you heard this story, he impersonated somebody from the government, and he rang up the person whom he suspected of being involved with his poisoning and said, oh yes, well, this is, I'm calling about just to debrief about the operation. What do you think went wrong, and what do you think went right? So what can we learn for the next time we try something? And that person confessed that, yes, they had, and I won't say confessed because he didn't know he was talking to Navalny, the person he'd actually poisoned, but he thought he was just debriefing to a handler. And he said, yes, they had rubbed Russian-developed nerve agent Novichok into the linings of a pair of underpants that Alexei Navalny subsequently wore. So they did that to get Novichok into his body. And Navalny was overcome on a plane where you can't typically get medical treatment, but the pilot of that plane diverted the flight and landed it, and doctors treated Navalny in Siberia, I think, and then he was airlifted to Germany and treated in a Berlin hospital and survived. And then made the decision, I know people have criticized it, and then people have criticized the criticism, saying, look, Navalny's working to help Russia. Don't criticize him for going back to Russia. Because he did. He returned to Russia, where the President Putin had sought to have him assassinated. He went back and he was arrested and charged with something fabricated and then convicted to some years in prison. And his health has deteriorated sharply since he's been in prison. He was already still recovering from an attempt made on his life via nerve agents. But yes, now he's in prison. It's similar to the Magnitsky story. And if you've heard the phrase Magnitsky Act, those are laws that American UK businessman Bill Browder helped advocate for all across the globe to argue for targeted sanctions to be placed on officials associated with murdering people. So the person that Bill Browder personally knew that they had murdered was Magnitsky, his accountant, who had unearthed this corrupt Russian government scheme to divert $230 million. Yes, darling? Not now, darling. Okay. Next one. Did you eat all your strawberries? Good. Yeah, you just wait, because that's quite a lot of food right now. 20 minutes. I'm going to say 20 minutes this time, darling. I did not think you would want a third helping. Yeah, anyway, you go back and you play with your brother. And maybe you can finish writing that story. If you write the story, I'll show everybody here. Or you could even just bring me the card you made that says Supermom, because I would love to show people. I thought your handiwork was so good. Molly is trying to like Chris Wallace but just can't. We don't have to like Chris Wallace. We appreciate that in a flurry of dross at Fox, he is someone who at least seeks to push back a little bit against Trumpist Republican disinformation, GOP, Trump, Russia disinformation circuitry. They're running a You found them?
Okay. A little blanket. Somehow Daddy made them to make a wheelchair. I'll say them first.
Okay, you show them. Look what she made for me this morning. Go a little bit center. Yeah, like that. See, now they can see. And then this was the illustrated version. So I love this font she created. Oh, that just says, I love you so much. You are the best mommy ever.
It says, Dear Mommy, I love you so much. You are the best mommy ever.
Now don't say your name so much. I'm not on the internet, baby. Okay, so you just say love from ... Your face looks purple. Have you been chewing on a pen as well?
No.
Because your lip looks like it's got a little bit of maybe black mixed with red, which makes it look a little bit purple. Could you just wash that bit, darling?
Okay.
They loved your card. They said awesome. See, that's a font. That's a 6-year-old devised font. I quite like it. And that's me. That's me. Oh, Molly's an artist. Well, can we describe you as an artist, Molly? Molly makes things out of clay, which is artistic. And she likes your font too, Bubba. Font means the letters that you drew all by yourself. Oh, they liked it, darling. Want to come say hi? This is my pumpkin. Yeah, see, Molly is an artist. So Molly said that's really great. She's an artist. And other people like it too. Marsha said great card. And Phil put his thumbs up, and then that's a clapping emoji. That's clap, clap, clap. All right, so, all right, so now you hop down until I come back to give you some more fairy bread when I finish. We've got to talk about Steve Bannon as well, because there's updates. Okay, so you go hang out, you go play.
I'm not going to make the book.
Are you going to make the book? Woohoo! Yeah, I suggested she write a story. Her stories are so fun that if she...
And I made it to be continued, but there's not a second book.
You may put to be
I
continued
may.
as a trick.
I might.
You might. You might. You're full of surprises. I suggested she write a story about it because her stories are excellent as her mother. That's the green book that has all the paper in it, Bubba, if you want to use that. She once wrote a story about, was it Zombie Santa? That was one of my favorite stories that you wrote. Yeah. See, that's got all the spare paper. All right, let's go back to reporting on the news because we are working to maintain the resistance. Look, Trump's out of office. Some people are more relaxed. I'm more relaxed. Have to work up to keep the impetus to keep broadcasting even without all of the same anxiety that I had driving me before, to say everybody must know as much as we can about what Trump is doing to people and his cronies and the people behind him who are helping finance this. And I mean, once he got into office, he was able to access finances from the American people and to help funnel money by selling access, I presume. I mean, Michael Cohen was making millions of dollars from becoming a consultant to various companies like Novartis and other people. So I don't know if Trump got a cut on those things, but he certainly did get a very large cut from perpetually visiting his own properties so that all his entourage, whose salaries and expenses are paid by the American people, would go stay at his properties in rooms that cost $600 a night.
Mama,
Yes, John? Do you want a pen?
Pieces.
Yeah, you can. You want me to rip them off, or do you want to just write in the book first and then take them off? You want to take them off first? Okay. There you go. Have fun, precious. Yazin Moore says hello from St. Petersburg. Nice. And Paul's here as well. I don't think I've said hello to Paul. Hi, Paul. So what are we up to? We've covered that Mark Burnett has had a documented relationship with Vladimir Putin. We've covered who's funding Donald Trump. That's what we were talking about, that there's some wealthy theocratic fascists, Charles Koch and his brother David Koch, who's now deceased, but whose fortune is still heavily invested in promoting a right-wing machine that perpetuates indoctrination amongst conservative Americans. So many people will note that whilst a lot of Trump flags came down after the election was lost, some only removed their Trump flags after the insurrection, and they found the discordance between their back the blue flags and their Trump flags when Trump had led an insurrection in an effort to overthrow the US government and the results of the US election on his own behalf. Some people took their flags down then, but there's still flags up. People report still having lots of neighbors with flags if they live in a pro-Trump area. And there's just holdouts still all over the land of people who, despite Trump being out of office, over 60 court cases proving that there was no substance, and in fact quite the opposite, to any claim that the election was stolen on Trump's behalf. There's people who still believe, who are trying to suggest Trump should be a candidate in 2024. I'm hoping that will erode over time because there's at least some subset of Republicans now who understand that Trump tried his best to stay in office, but that he didn't use entirely ethical, legal, or conscionable or patriotic methods to do so. The Constitution seeks to prevent tyrants who overthrow government to install themselves. The Constitution frowns on that. So it was a bit harder. It eroded some of the numbers of Republicans pretending to be simultaneously devoted to the Constitution and Trump. So what are our targets now? Now we are still trying to be the resistance in the face of Republican efforts to overthrow the voting system itself, to so constrain the ability of relatively disenfranchised minority populations to access voting polls. they, at least in Georgia, backed off legislating out the Sunday voting. So they've kept that. I recently clarified my information sources to say that was one of the original proposals to end the souls to the polls efforts of mobilizing voters who attend church and then all go in vans together after church, the black churches, who used that to generate happiness around voting, and so increasing voting attendance and voting participation to overcome some understandable reluctance if you look at it in a historical context, because there are people who will have lost ancestors to murderous mobs of white people who sought to prevent black participation in the voting process by lynching, by murdering black people who dared to vote, by lynching and murdering black people who ran for office, by driving out of town and murdering black people who succeeded and were elected to office. So there's been lots of historical documented instances where black people have suffered in ways that white communities can't possibly relate to, of having lost loved ones and lost intergenerational wealth, lost intergenerational love. When you decimate, well, not necessarily decimate populations, but when you terrorize populations in that way, you're also diminishing their ability to create wealth and have comfortable lives, because you might have killed the breadwinners in their family. You might have scared people so much that they became psychologically encumbered to the extent that they couldn't work productively anymore, or that when you're terrorized, your income generating ability is reduced. So the comments, we don't have any comments relating to that right at this moment, but I'm sure you're all still thinking about this, because this is a critical matter for our time to consider. How firmly do we stand together? Now, I know the cultural climate in America can sometimes focus on punishing people and calling them out for being unconsciously racist as well as consciously racist. And a lot of people will live in fear of that, of maybe accidentally betraying themselves. So one antidote to that type of anxiety is to get ahead of it and to say, look, we are all to a degree racist. Our brains are marinated in a culture informed by racist outcomes. So whatever culture you live in will always have a degree of self-justification. Americans have a word for that, rationalization. Wherever there are crimes, there will always be somebody who's rationalized them. So somebody's mother who said, my son didn't commit a crime, or if he did, it wasn't really a crime, it was self-defense. There's always an element of that. And Germany made a big effort after World War II to educate their children, to make it compulsory in schools to learn about the Holocaust. They understood how important it was as a culture to not roll with the naturalistic impulse of denying what had happened, to just going with that very human instinct to rationalize and overlook bad actions and bad outcomes. So they had enough good leadership to consciously revisit what happened and to look at who was to blame, and to look at the broad degree of participation in persecuting Jewish people, communist people, homosexual people, political opponents of Hitler, everything, all the people who were sent to camps, all the people that the German population was initially told are just going to work for Germany to pay off their debt to German society before being allowed to reintegrate with German society. They didn't really get a chance to reintegrate because the organizational difficulties of employing Jewish people as slaves for various industries across Europe, that was hard. And at some point they decided to solve the problem by mass murdering people. And well, that's some darkness I'm not going to go into right now, other than say Americans have sometimes allowed textbooks to flourish that deny the nature of slavery and that deny what happened to end Reconstruction, deny or overlook the fact that when federal troops were withdrawn from southern states, that people were then emboldened to turn on the freed Black Americans and to burn their businesses and properties and to physically punish them or murder them and terrorize them for voting, for the act of seeking to participate in the sharing of political power between wealthy people and common folk who are allowed to vote under the original Constitution, but more importantly, the amendments that broadened the voting base in the United States. And that whitewash that has happened has contributed to people whose worldviews are then racist, whose worldviews then have become used to finding ways to rationalize the harms done physically and economically and longitudinally to Black Americans. And when those wrongs are more recognized, sometimes people feel guilty and don't know how to work with that guilt. Sometimes people feel ashamed and don't know how to work with that shame. So to any of us who can, it's incumbent on us to model ways of bearing that shame in a psychologically viable way, to model how you can be ashamed, but also separate yourself from it if it wasn't you, to model how each generation makes moral choices. Each generation chooses to recognize or ignore the wrongs of the past. Each generation and each individual makes choices. So you can't be buried in the shame of other people's choices if you want to have enough power to go forward making good choices. Depressed people find it hard to get good things done for their societies. So you can say that conservatives probably see themselves as people who are guardians against an overabundance of shame and regret and recrimination. They're saying, don't feel bad, don't waste time on that. We can work together, but let's just pretend there's no such thing as color. And look, a lot of Democrats have participated in that outdated approach as well of let's put it all behind us. Let's put all the racism behind us and say, clean slate, guys. So by being colorblind, there won't be any racism going forwards, and ignoring the baked in consequences of racism across time and space, not just in America, but all over the world. Nick has asked, what books am I referring to specifically? I'm not referring to any books specifically. I'm just referring to textbooks from Texas, which I know is a state that often is involved in compiling and selling textbooks to other states. So we can find the name if you like, Texas textbooks. In past years, Texas, I'm looking at an NPR story that says why calling slaves workers is more than an editing error. Kobe Byrne was reading his textbook sitting in geography class near Houston when he noticed a troubling caption. The 15-year-old quickly took a picture with his phone and sent it to his mother. Next to a map of the United States describing patterns of immigration, it read that the Atlantic slave trade brought millions of workers from Africa to the southern United States to work on agricultural plantations. Kobe caught a textbook error that had been missed by several editorial layers, starting with mega publisher McGraw-Hill Education, followed by the official textbook reviewers, and finally members of the Texas Board of Education who have the final say on materials like this. Kobe's mother, Roni Dean Byrne, is a former teacher pursuing her doctorate at the University of Houston. For her, that word workers was an attempt to erase that hard writing has had, that slavery has had on the paper of our society. So yeah, it's not an error, is it? And it's not just for her. For any rational person, writing that workers were imported by the Atlantic slave trade is a gross mischaracterization of slavery and a gross mischaracterization of how America rose to global superpower status on the back of the unpaid exploitative labor of enslaved people who had no freedom, whose lives were controlled, who were brutalized, and had their family members ripped apart and were often repeatedly raped by their owners as well. So there you go, Nick. That is a specific textbook that I've quoted for you, and I'll put up the NPR article for you as well in the comments section. So that was published in 2015. Christopher is saying we found the same efforts in Michigan and Arizona. Yes. Now, these are errors overlooked by white editors and layers of white people in editorial positions. People who, at some level, believe that it is too disempowering to admit reality. That instead it will be empowering if you say, we didn't do anything wrong, our ancestors didn't do anything wrong, workers were imported across the Atlantic. So that's a very important thing to know, because those textbooks don't stay in Texas either. Texas imports textbooks to other parts of America. Let's see if the NPR story relates that. So several weeks ago, Dean Byrne blasted the publisher in an online video that's been viewed nearly 2 million times. For her, the caption's language speaks to larger issues of social justice and the Black Lives Matter movement. The slaves, their stories, their lives, their bodies, they didn't matter enough to call it what it was. The story has renewed a national debate about how textbooks deal with race and slavery, especially the power of language and grammar as tools to interpret history, already a subjective area to teach. So it's not just an error in the caption. She looked at the book, and while the book describes many Europeans immigrating as indentured servants, she found no mention in this lesson of Africans forced to the US as slaves. So not only did it call them workers, but there was no actual correct information in the book either. There was no reference to slavery, to the importation of people from Africa in captured conditions, where millions didn't even survive the journey of being treated as an animal cargo in the hold in chains, conditions which were not conducive to life, but they were prepared to just take as many people across in ships as they could and just, know that the survivors would be extra hardy because they had survived that concentrated process of selecting people who can survive conditions that favor death. David Levin, CEO of McGraw-Hill Education, believes this mistake was an editorial error and not a problem with the standards. In the past year, Texas textbooks have been criticized for listing Moses as a founding father. Well, that's quite laughable. For listing Moses as a founding father and for downplaying slavery as a cause of the Civil War. Those issues apparently stemmed from the learning standards that the Texas State Board of Education sets to guide publishers. In Texas, some state officials are considering how to improve their textbook adoption process. This is kind of whitewashing, that it pretends the textbook officials are working in good faith to more accurately represent slavery instead of completely excluding it from textbooks and describing slavery as the importation of workers. Everybody admits it shouldn't have happened, so let's figure out how to prevent it in the future, says Thomas Ratcliffe, Vice Chair of the Texas Board of Education. The board's 15 elected members approved the final materials for 5 million Texas students. Well, That's nice that everybody admits it shouldn't have happened. Phil's going to bed. Phil's also pointed out that similar to Trump's insurrectionists and domestic terrorists being labeled as patriots or protesters. Phil's going to sleep, which I applaud. Someone said hello from Taipei. Hello? And Phil dropped off an appreciate award on his way out. Thanks, Paul. Much appreciated. Passive phrasing hides the identity of the criminal. Women are raped. People were imported. That's a very good point, Kim. Highlighting linguistic choices that reveal the intent, whether conscious or unconscious, of the writers and editors to conceal the perpetrator's identity, to minimize their role. Because passive construction acts as if things just happened. The women were raped. People were workers were imported. No, slave traders kidnapped people from Africa and brought them over in order to make a profit from the misery and subjugation of human beings. So that is important to keep in mind. Now, I'm going to go back to some other notorious fascists right now because I'm going to look a little bit at what is trending about Steve Bannon, because there's been a development there, and I meant to cover it before. So Steve Bannon, let's see if we can find something up to date. So yes, we know that Steve participated in a GoFundMe type scheme where Trump supporters sent him and his co-conspirators money to build the wall, and instead they bought a yacht. We can watch a short little video, which I think is useful. It's produced by Midas Touch, which you may know as a group of brothers, many of whom are lawyers, who decided to devote their time to making effective clips that highlight Trump's role and the role of his cronies in defrauding America and endangering Americans.
Papadopoulos was convicted of lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russians.
He was the coffee boy.
Don't remember much about it.
Former Trump Papadopoulos.
Okay. So I'm going to share the screen and then press play.
Papadopoulos was convicted of lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russians.
He was the coffee boy.
Don't remember much about it.
Former Trump campaign advisor Rick Gates pleaded guilty.
Paul Manafort convicted on 8 criminal counts.
George Nader just arrested today on child pornography charges.
Associates of the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani.
Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman.
I don't even know who they are.
Felix Sater. He is in the news because of his efforts to build a hotel in Moscow with Donald Trump.
If he were sitting in the room right now, I really wouldn't know what he looked like.
President Trump's longtime personal lawyer, Michael Cohen.
Michael Flynn admitting he lied to the FBI.
Roger Stone has now been found guilty on 7 counts.
Breaking news of Trump's ex-political advisor, Steve Bannon, being arrested in connection with a crowdfunding scheme called We Build the Wall.
Midas Touch is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Oops. Accidentally clicked something. I didn't want to deprive the Midas Touch people of. Whoa. Okay. Pressed too many buttons. And now my computer is laggy. All right, I just wanted to. Dang it. All right, you know what? I'm just going to keep talking for a bit instead, because it looks like I'm not going to be able to go back and fix that with HAPS. I wanted to show you their name. It's midastouch.com. They still take donations from people, and unlike the Lincoln Project, they're slightly less embroiled in controversy over some of their founding members being implicated as groomers and exploiters of their social status and political position, because John Weaver was exposed. And yes, it's kind of a stain on the Lincoln Project situation. But at the same time, what the Lincoln Project represents is a bridge of understanding between decent people in the Democratic Party and decent people who were formerly in the Republican Party, but who understood the nature of a demagogue consolidating power and working to overthrow American democracy and create a whole lot of corpses in the process of doing so, because Trump pursued self-interest at the expense of the American people over and over again. Christopher Lucas asks if isn't Bannon merely a messenger between Mercer and Trump, including Trump's GOP? That is one of Bannon's roles, but it's not limited to that. Bannon is very active internationally as someone who attempts to foment fascism all around the world. So he lost a court case in Italy because he was trying to run a little cult fascist movement in an 800-year-old monastery in Italy. But the Italian government won the right to kick him and his little school of, what do they call them? Gladiators. He had a school for gladiators, literally training people to be warriors for fascist movements, where you denigrate migration, you denigrate multiculturalism, and you learn how to speak plausibly to camera so that people will go, oh, well, maybe he's got a point and we should listen. So he is a renowned nihilistic fascist who says when everything collapses, that's when you get to start again from the beginning. And he denigrates China, but he was also cooperating with a wealthy Chinese person and was hiding from the law at one point by living in a yacht owned by a Chinese billionaire off the coast of America. So Steve Bannon is a Nazi, a hypocrite, a nihilist, a fraudster, all manner of things, as well as a go-between between Christian billionaire Robert Mercer and aspirational businessman, but heavily in debt, Trump and Trump Republicans. So let's see if I can bring anything up about Bannon. So that wasn't particularly, the video wasn't particularly informative about Bannon overall, but it was a backgrounding bit of information just to remember how many people associated with Trump were ultimately charged with crimes. Many of them were released from jail. Manafort was released early from jail because of COVID. All manner of favors and pardons occurring under Trump. So Steve Bannon was pardoned, but presidents can only issue pardons for federal crimes. So New York Attorney General, this is the breaking news, relatively breaking. The New York Attorney General, Letitia James, has partnered up with Manhattan DA Cy Vance on his Steve Bannon investigation. So that is exciting. Do you want to see a picture of the monastery that Bannon was in? I can show you. Share the page. So this is what was reported. Italy can evict Steve Bannon's school for far-right gladiators from an 800-year-old monastery, the country's top court rules. I can tell you a little bit about that. There was a years-long court battle between Bannon and the Italian Culture Ministry. It's a decisive ruling against Bannon and his would-be school for far-right nationalists. The tribunal ruled that the state has the right to revoke the 19-year lease it granted Bannon in 2017 to open his school, because they found that they obtained an economic advantage on the basis of declarations made at the time of the bid that was subsequently shown not to be true. So he lied to the Italian government to open a school. They lied about their qualifications to maintain such a site, a historic 800-year-old monastery, as well as their intentions for it. So Bannon was rude about the decision and says we refuse to be stopped by the corrupt bureaucracy that infests Italian government and hurts the Italian people. So people like Steve Bannon are very good at disparaging others, but themselves are guilty of all manner of corrupt activity. They were going to train modern gladiators in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Locals staged numerous protests against the academy. Wow. I just want to know what he means by training modern gladiators. Is he literally training people? Is he literally seeking to train people to fight or to rhetorically fight? All right. And Bloomberg has an article on it as well. We can have a little look at the development. So Letitia James and AG Manhattan attorney, district attorney, dang it. Oh, the Suez Canal ship has been partly refloated. That's good. And New York's leaders have vowed to legalize pot use. But where is the story about Bannon going? Come on, Bloomberg, let me see it. Okay, so they're working with Manhattan prosecutors who started gathering information on defrauding people. All right. But every time I try and look at it, it's just bringing up an ad asking me to subscribe, which is understandable. Certain people have to earn money by a subscription model. Oh, Indoor Smokers is here and he said hi. And Paul said trying to start up another Proud Boys organization. Sounds like something like that, yes. Well, look, I've kept his photo on the screen for too long. Wow, this is a very offensive troll. So I can mute the user, it says, which would be nice. Let's see if I can do that. I don't think it works if I mute users from Twitter, but, you know, we can work on it. So, yes, it sounds like Steve Bannon, that the investigation is relating to the fraud perpetrated against Trump donors. Not that many of us mind that much that the Trump donors were defrauded, but as a matter of principle, if you commit crimes, you should go to jail. So, yes, somebody called Lincoln's Bible puts forward a nice quote that says, "I love democracy, and I don't want it to end in this wrestling match with American Nazis, communist turned kleptocratic nation states, and global mobligarchs like the Kochs and Mercers." It's quite a lot of poetry in one Twitter post. I totally endorse that position. So let's look at the language she used. Communist turned kleptocratic nation states. So that's China, which was previously communist, but also Russia, which was previously communist and has become a mobligarch state. And yes, mobligarchs like the Kochs and the Mercers, who seek to pervert the exercise of power by the public by distorting democracy, by founding Cambridge Analytica to help swing the election in favor of a candidate that they own or that they have significant influence over. So, yes. Okay. So the move where Manhattan's district attorney is partnering with the New York district attorney, Letitia James, the implication of that apparently is that the move adds prosecutorial firepower to the criminal case. Now, isn't that a phrase that feels all warm and cozy? Yeah, come on, sticky tape. Are you sticking together the pages now? Is your story nearly done?
No, it's already done.
It's done.
Yeah.
So now there's the sticky tape part. Yeah. That's so exciting. I'm so excited to read your story. I'm struggling with the sticky tape a little bit though.
And there won't be a too big end.
Oh, did you get to the ending?
I forgot to
Could you check? I know there's a smaller sticky tape as well, my darling. Could you try and find that? You know, the small one. It's about this big.
No, I
No?
don't
You don't
need
know where that?
that.
Because I'm just struggling with this. Aha. It's because I was trying to there we go. That's Mummy's makeup. Okay. Indoor Smokers says it's a win-win. I like that they were defrauded and that Bannon will go to jail for defrauding them. True. Yes, those are all nice things. All right. Somebody, some more posts about COVID, which I'll share. So here is Dr. Sanjay Gupta had a special called COVID War. And Dr. Fauci admitted to having to directly contradict Trump on COVID-19. Dr. Redfield told me he was pressured to change a CDC report. And Dr. Birx says she was not able to speak frankly about the pandemic nationally. I know she's used an analogy of it like being in a military hierarchy where you don't challenge your orders. And of course, military hierarchy is quite different from civilian employment. Civilian employment, you can resign, particularly when you know that there are millions of people's lives on the line. You can choose not to participate, not to support and facilitate the American public being deceived in a way with incredibly deadly consequences. You can make sure that the shield of your former scientific accomplishments, because Dr. Birx was part of the team that worked on solutions to the AIDS crisis, the way that AIDS was killing so many Americans. And she brought the cover of that background. She brought her reputational prestige to attach to Trump and then protect him from criticisms that, if made broadly by the scientific community, would have helped stop Trump from selling a terrible approach to the American people, an approach of federal government hands off and all responsibility on the states, even as he was deceiving the states and withholding critical information from state governors. So he wasn't telling Governor Cuomo that it was an airborne disease. People still thought that they could control it by washing their hands and sanitizing surfaces. And that was happening at the stage that Cuomo was having hospital patients moved out of hospitals and into nursing homes in the belief that they could just install some safety practices and it would be easier if hospitals had room for an influx of patients. But of course, when you don't know it's airborne and you move people into nursing homes, they put people in communal circumstances and they won't keep people out of each other's airspace when they don't know that. So that just accelerated deaths amongst vulnerable populations in New York. And I know people attack Cuomo for that, but ultimately the responsibility for those mishaps lie with Trump, who withheld information from people at a critical juncture in the pandemic response timeline. So this is a picture of Deborah Birx, Dr. Deborah Birx, holding up a picture at a press conference, and Mike Pence is smiling benevolently behind her. But what it says on that board, it says coronavirus testing, new options for consumers. So up at the front, it says screen something. People were pointing it out just because it has the word consumers on it, to show that they were commodifying the process of testing. They weren't treating Americans as citizens who needed testing in order to preserve life and preserve the economy, but as consumers who could potentially choose to pursue a process. Only under Trump, they couldn't easily choose to pursue a process of being tested either, because Trump didn't facilitate a national testing strategy. Jared Kushner was helping to develop one, but then they elected not to proceed with that plan because they decided it was more politically expedient to stay out of it and let state governors take the blame for the mass deaths that would result as a consequence of federal inaction. Indoor Smokers notes that they are opening up vaccines for anyone over 16 on May the 1st here. Marsha says, so why do we crucify Dr. Birx but feel Dr. Fauci is a hero? They were both complicit in COVID deaths and both complicit in Trump's lying to the American people. Fauci's eye rolling was not enough to keep people alive. True, but Fauci gets slightly better points because he was a little more explicit with the American people about the risk. Dr. Fauci was working behind the scenes, actively supporting Trump's response by sharing graphs that showed that the virus, models of the virus in which it just dissipated. So her bad faith activity was much more than Dr. Fauci's. His reputation is much more intact because he didn't do as much work behind the scenes to support a herd immunity argument, and he didn't try and launder Trump's reputation by making public statements about how Trump engaged with the scientific material and synthesize it and just have such a great understanding. That was Dr. Birx's comments. So I'm with you in that I also consider Fauci to be, to a degree, complicit in the deaths, but at the same time, he did put in much more work to advocate for mask wearing and for social distancing, etc. So he did more work that stands the test of time, as in it was proactive work to encourage Americans to be safe. Trump still would have lied to the American people without scientists by his side, because after all, he did that for a long period of time and people still supported him. His support did not fall. So Fauci illustrates that resigning was not always necessarily the best choice, that preserving a degree of access to the American people had some small benefit, but Dr. Birx is going to be much more denigrated for her role because she embraced the task of supporting Trump much more obviously, and her ambition seems to have dragged her in that direction. Yes, Birx was there in the room. That was a critical moment in time where she could have gotten up and said in that moment, or actually, it's not biologically compatible with life to inject disinfectant. And Trump might have at that point then said, oh, okay, you're right. And at least that would have stopped that bad message going out to the American people, that subset of the American population that reveres Trump and his every word, and would have stopped some people from injecting bleach. So she was worse, yes. Someone called Neil Nelson has just subscribed. Thank you to Neil. I know soon Periscope will close, and at that point, a large chunk of my audience simply won't be able to find me anymore, because at present, Haps is streaming live to Periscope, but that avenue won't be open anymore. So if you watch me and enjoy my broadcast on Periscope, know that in 2 days, it won't be an option anymore. So if you subscribe to me on Haps, then you'll know how to find me, and you can get alerts on my broadcasts. So there's that. So we've established Dr. Birx definitely worse. And look, I was hoping that Joe Biden wouldn't elevate Fauci, but when he did, because I accept Joe Biden's judgment as being infinitely superior to mine in terms of political longevity and documented history of actually winning for the American people, if he thought it was important to use the respect that Americans have in a bipartisan sense for Dr. Fauci still, then to go ahead with using his voice and using the communication channels that he's established with the American people. That Dr. Fauci was still at least always advocating for science, and Dr. Birx was not. Dr. Birx definitely allowed Trump to pervert science. What's wrong, Bubba? Do you need help with the sticky tape? Yeah, we can always fix it, baby. Remember, whatever problem comes up, we can try and problem solve. She's making a story and she's sticking some pages together. I will note that Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson has signed a bill allowing medical workers to refuse treatment to LGBTQ people, which is a move that will be challenged in court and so probably won't stand. But it's indicative of the performative cruelty of much of the Republican Party, that they're trying to gratify people's wishes to be socially dominant with Christian, evangelical Christian morality, because it's not all Christians. Many Christians support LGBTQ people, and America has become much more broad in its adoption of marriage equality as a good or at least acceptable thing. So, allowing for gay people to have the same level of humanity and legal protections as is afforded to heterosexual people. But the Arkansas governor doing that, not just being homophobic in and of himself, but using a homophobic, anti-trans, anti-gay people policy proposal, is showing that he thinks that's a winning attitude. Darling, do you want to come here and Mummy will see if I can help you? What's wrong, sweetie? Did the sticky tape get all stuck together?
It got stuck and then it ripped out of the paper.
Ripped out of the paper?
And the paper can't connect.
Okay.
The sticky tape is gonna make the plug.
Okay, so why don't you bring me a pair of scissors?
No.
If I cut through the sticky tape, I can maybe help you start again from the beginning and reconnect it. No? Do you want to give her a cuddle, Daddy? She might need a little comforting cuddle. So maybe this will be my final point then. And it's taken from somebody speaking about Canadian conservatives, but I think it's very relevant to conservative nationalistic forces all over the world. Somebody gets support from journalists, and then the journalist gets exclusive scoops with the conservative politicians. And this commentator has said conservatives' goal was to cause culture wars, division, and hate by having trusted sources lie to the public. Sweetie, could you cuddle our daughter, darling? She's so sad. There we go. She's sad. Let's listen to a song.
Antibody, antibody, bodies, antibody, yaddy, 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 yaddies, antibodies, IgM, IgA, IgM, IgE, IgG, IgA, IgM, IgE, body, yaddy, yaddy, yaddies, antibody, yaddy, 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 yaddies.
Okay. That's in relation to a Saturday Night Live song about boomers getting access to the vaccines. Now, is that the right song? Oops. Sorry, my apologies. Oh, and I'm also going to note that under Trump, the GOP tax scam of 2017 lowered taxes on the wealthy whilst effectively raising taxes on middle-income Americans and passing the skinny repeal of the ACA. Do you remember that? Which jacked up health insurance premiums exponentially and resulted in 23 million people losing access to their health care. So, look, it's not the best thing that they've done, and they'll claim that that tax increases are the fault of Democrats, and they won't mention that it was a baked-in sunset clause in the 2017 tax scam bill that said wealthy tax cuts will endure for the wealthy, and the middle-class tax cuts will end in 2021. So that's what's happening now. There hasn't been a Democrat tax increase yet, but there has been a Republican legislated tax increase for the middle class.
That's good.
Are we going to the cafe now? Okay.
Now have some degree of protection. States and getting vaccines into their older population.
The majority of baby boomers have been vaccinated. Vaccinated. Baby boomers, greatest generation. Got all the money, now we got the vaccination. Crash the economy 3 whole times, but when it comes to the vaccine, the first in line.
Got a job out of college, everybody, have a great day.
Retirement funded
and
100%.